I could live in China. I could be considered to have constructive notice of a real estate document that was recorded in the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. Because if I can't get there, I gotta hire an attorney then, in Cook County, say, go down and look at the public records. I mean, it was, but now it's easy breezy, right? You just look it up online. So, but it didn't used to be. So that's what constructive notice is. And you're gonna juxtapose it anytime, and not just title transfer. If it comes up in any other chapter about constructive notice, it's actual notice that you're juxtaposing it. An actual notice is somebody gave it to me, or I sensed it with, you know, one of my 5 senses and stuff. You know, like usually it would be, I picked it up, I read it, I felt it, the paper in my hand. But if you went to a property, they tell you this in this paragraph, and you saw something with your own eyes, right? Then you couldn't say you didn't have, you got actual notice by seeing it with your own eyes. But if we're talking documents, right, you would have received right in your hand, and, you know, you would have had an opportunity to read it. You know, that's one of the actual notice. And we definitely aren't forgetting, we've learned all this, so I'm just kind of going right through it, that recording does what? It gets you into your position in line if you're a lien. So I guess there's 2 categories. In general, it's giving constructive notice. But if you're someone who's recording a lien against the property, you got in line in your priority. And your priority of what? Your priority of getting paid at the forced sale of that property or the debt that's owed to you. You secure it with that property. So we're on page 179. Chain of title. Let's talk about that and title search and abstract of title. That all comes up again. You just got to trust me on this on chapter 10. So it's really redundant. We talked about it's like it's not a couple pages into chapter 10. It's just called real estate closings, that chapter. But when in Illinois, and especially it's customary in this area, you're going to get a title company involved if you're going to have a real estate closing. Residential, commercial, doesn't matter. You're going to, usually the way it works is the seller's attorney become agents of title companies. And so, in effect, the seller's attorney of a real estate deal is bringing the title business. What are we talking about? Title insurance, right? We're talking, they sell insurance title companies do. They're really called the title insurance company. So they're selling title insurance. They're insuring, what are they insuring? This is all on this page. They're ensuring that this term, marketable, so if anybody remembers, if you're going to do residential, and you're going to stay in this area, you're going to use the 7.0, is the form we're on right now. Multi-board, meaning boards of realtors, boards of attorneys, boards of lenders, boards of home inspectors, got on board and came up with the verbiage. You know, the attorneys drafted it in the end, but came up with the verbiage of this contract. So multi-board residential real estate contract. Know for the exam, you'll get this question. A contract in Illinois for the sale of real estate needs to be called. So that's why at the end of this, it's called real estate contract. I said we have to be on the 7.0 version, multi-board. You won't be tested on this reading of this 7.0 multi-board residential, but this is the part that we tested on. Real estate contract, it has to be, we could have said whatever we wanted to, you know what I mean, in front of this, but it has to be called a real estate contract. It can't be called an offer to purchase, it can't be called, purchase agreement, it's got to be called a real estate contract. You'll get that question more likely than that. Big percentage. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about, in that contract, I backed up a minute to say, it promises, in that contract, we're about to talk about contracts, the seller is promising to deliver on the day of closing marketable title. And why do we care about something if it's marketable? We talked about this. I don't want to buy something that now my right of disposition is, all fouled up or something. I want to be able to sell it to somebody else. So that's what it means to be marketable. If it's burdened with liens or unwanted encumbrances of some nature, it's not necessarily marketable, right? We said it's not going to, encumbrances do not prevent, this is recap, right, the transfer of real estate. But it certainly is going to narrow the pool in some instances to who might be willing to buy it now, right? If I've got certain liens on it or whatever, So marketable title. So what I'm trying to get as a buyer, and I am promised to get in a real estate contract that we're is marketable title. Title insurance company sell title insurance to ensure that that's what I'm getting. Because they did what? I'm backing into this whole thing here. Okay, bottom page 179. Because they did a title search and a change of title. They went into the public databases and they took that PIN number and that legal description that were, is the subject property of our transaction, and they searched all the interests that are affecting that property. And they did things like search the people that are involved in the transaction. Good morning, Ms. the buyer, the seller, especially the seller, and did name searches too to see why. Did they have any cases against them, active lawsuits that could what? Affect the title of the property. We talked about that thing called the res pendens, which means litigation pending in Latin. And that would be something that every mortgage company is going to go file, let's say file a foreclosure. Because they're going to let everybody know, hey, this title is probably coming our way in the future. You're going to interest in it. So the chain of title is actually a very specific document that the title company produces. And definitely, you don't want a break in your chain of title, because when they go back, they being the title company, and they do this quote-unquote chain of title, if there are no disputes, they'll only go back, what is it, about 40 years, they ask that question. No disputes around the title or no recent litigations, anything like that, it's common to go back 40 years. But if there is, they'll go back as much as 75 years, or maybe even longer. With this search, is an example. So, think about it. Well, it's always kind of confusing when I do this. But grantor 1 and grantee 1, I'm doing a title search. Grantee 1 absolutely has to be grantor 2 for there to be the chain of title we want to see. Because this person sold to this person, who then turned around and in the next transaction became the grantor who sold, to grantee number 2. And then grantee number 3 needs to be, grantee number 2 needs to be grantor number 3. Right, you see where I'm going. Like, so the chain can't be broken, because then you're suspicious of some fraudulent activity, because everybody should know who they're selling to, and then that person should have, all they did was held title and then sold it to the next person. So that's a chain of title. That's one of the very important documents, that you as a buyer are happy with, right? The title companies out there doing that in the public records. Like I gave that example of a student that came through here. Somebody wanted her to sell her property without doing any of this, or make her do this on her own. And a lot of times you might hire an attorney or something to do it, and you could do it, but she's paying cash, and so the judge is like, it was too many little red, signs. But then the title search itself goes beyond just checking grantor or grantee. It's looking, like I said, at all encumbrances, anything that's of record at least. And we'll talk a little bit more about stuff that's out of record here, or not on record. What I mean by that is that somebody actually filed it with the Cook County Recorder of Deeds on record and recorded it. Now, I do want you to be familiar with what marketable title is. That, like I said, it's the title that a buyer is expecting to get, not encumbered in a way that they're not expecting it to be encumbered, and that, for the most part, general rule, it's going to be marketable. Now, it's liens and encumbrances that affect marketability. So this whole process here, title search and stuff, is what's going to, uncover the rocks, if there wasn't something. And the whole point is that it wasn't there in the first place. That's why you're buying this. Because if somebody comes out of the woodwork, like I said yesterday, but you purchased your insurance policy, so you're safe in that sense. So as far as somebody trying to say, hey, I had an interest in that title, wasn't on public record, well, probably wasn't valid. Probably, I'm not going to say it wasn't. Now there's the last concept in this chapter, but very testable. You just got to hang in there with me, because they'll all come together in a page and a half. This term, assurance. I know we just got done talking about insurance, but we're going to talk about assurance for a second. Meaning that I have a sense of, it's obviously the root word is assure, but I have an assurance that the title, we're still talking about title really, is the basis of the conversation. But they call it, instead of proof of ownership, assurance of ownership. You can be assured. Because like I said, that's the main, we talked about this theme yesterday. That's the main thing, right? When we talked about warranty deeds. Those are the main deeds that people use in transfers. So you want to, and the special warranty deed promises this too. I own it, I have the right to transfer it, because you don't want to buy anything from anybody that doesn't really have the right to do it, because then you don't own anything. You don't own anything if the person that sold it to you didn't own it, you didn't buy anything, because you bought what they didn't own, you know? So, I mean, would you get made whole if you could go find him and sue him and do all that stuff? Maybe, you know, if they had the resources, but, so there are 3 ways in Illinois and in other states that you could search for this assurance or proof of ownership. Because you want that before you buy something. So we're in the mind of the buyer right now, right? Before you sign on the dotted line, so to speak. Or make the transfer and deliver the deed. So know this for the exam. Very important to just, you know, very academically understand this. A deed by itself is the first paragraph of this issue. A deed by itself is not considered sufficient evidence of ownership in Illinois. And we'll talk about what would be sufficient then. So if I just have a piece of paper, right, we did that yesterday where I wrote deed up at the top and I'm walking around with it. I'm saying that piece of paper in your hand is not sufficient evidence if you had to get into court of law and start arguing that you really own something. That piece of paper isn't enough on its own. You have to have some other form of assurance. If somebody were really trying to sue you about the basis of the lawsuit is who owns it or trying to get in on your title somehow. So there are these 2 other ways that certainly aren't as strong as the last way through the insurance company. There's something called a certificate of title. I want you to be familiar with that. And an attorney's opinion of title. So there's certificate of title, and this would probably be done by a title company. And then there is, what I said, you know, it's the attorney's, obviously done by the attorney's opinion of title. And then the third one is title insurance. So the first 2, they're kind of, you could talk about them in the same, you know, tone. They aren't providing the same type of guarantee that you're going to get out of buying an insurance policy. You buy one of those from the title company or an attorney, you have them go do more or less is what the title company is going to do, the title search and stuff like that, but you had an attorney to do it. They produce a document for you. Same, probably similar exactly to the title search document that you're going to get from the title company. But if they mess up, worst you can do is sue them for negligence. They messed up in a document that they were saying this is the title that's going on. But when you buy this, right, we all know, you know, even if, you know, this you're new to this stuff, what insurance does. If you know, we all have car insurance and maybe homeowners insurance or renter's insurance, right? Insurance protects you in an event of a loss if you really didn't get what you thought you were getting, so to speak. In title, what are we talking about? Deep sea, you know, you've got the full, somebody else had their hands in it. There's so many titles we can talk about, right? Where somebody, the title is messed up or something. But know that this is referred to as assurance of title. So the deed plus one of these would be better, you know, than just the deed by itself. But the deed plus this one is like the golden status, right? Title insurance. So let's just talk a little bit about title insurance, and then we'll be done with this chapter. Typically, or I should say customarily in this region, the seller will pay for, and the contract reads this way too, will pay for the buyer's title policy, insurance policy that day at closing. And it's kind of one of the pricier items, you know, on a closing statement. It's commensurate with the price of the purchase, and so, you know, you won't get out of a closing paying under about $1,100 to $1,300 for, you know, properties that are like, you know, 100,000, 150,000. I mean, so that they go up from there. So it's at least starting at, you're paying more than $1,000 for sure, the seller is. So they buy this title insurance policy for the buyer, and that's called the owner's insurance policy. But the seller, like I was saying, is buying it for the purchaser, owner's title insurance policy. Because I want you to know this one, and I want you to know one more. If there's going to be financing that day, there'll be 2 policies bought. There'll be the owner's title insurance policy bought, and then there'll be 3, does not come back before, okay. Last time I checked it was 2. Okay, so there'll be a lender's title insurance policy too. So we've got the owners plus you, and then the lenders. These two policies are written exactly, it's like one's just a copy of the other, literally the pages, what they say on them. And so, the buyer himself or herself has to purchase this one. This one's only about $550, but the seller purchases this one for the buyer at closing. Like I said, that's customary in Illinois to do that. And the only other thing we're gonna say here is, bless you. So, I knew I wanted to tie this together. This underlined statement at the bottom of page 181, when they talk about this, what this means is connected directly to what I just said a second ago. When I said in Illinois it's customary, and our contract reads this, the seller will pay for the buyer's insurance policy. This gets tested on, and it's Illinois law that says, let's read exactly how they written it. So if you are obligated to pay for the title insurance, which I just said is the seller in our case, you have the right to choose the title insurance company and the agent who will provide it. So you don't get tested on this, but to show you how it all works so you just know, that's why the seller's attorney, because he or she is the agent for the title company, goes and chooses where we go then, because the seller has the right to do that via the contract, because the seller's paying for the title insurance policy that day. So they've got the right to say, I'm gonna go buy it from there, I'm buying it for you, buyer, but I'm gonna pay for it, so I get to say where I'm gonna go buy it from. But no, that's how it works, because you're always like, where are we gonna close, where are we gonna close? Well, it's where the seller's attorney says we're gonna close, that's how it works. I want you to know two other things about that owner's title insurance policy. And I want you to know this for the test and for real life. You can get two policies, two levels of policies that the seller can purchase for the buyer that day. And it's going to depend on one main thing, whether a survey was provided that day at closing. If there was no survey, then the title company is only willing to extend what's called standard coverage. And we're talking about, like I said, this one right here, standard coverage. But if there is a survey involved, this one that says extended coverage, it's in italics there, you can get that one. And that's the absolute top standard you want to get, extended coverage. Because what extended coverage does is, the title company went through and did all that, work, searching public databases, produced a report for us. By the way, it's either called a title search or a title commitment. Same document, title search, title commitment. It's saying, we're going to commit to ensuring, over this, because this is what we found in public databases. If a survey is involved, they'll stick their necks out, because they could see, were there any physical encroachments and that kind of thing, because we know a spot survey shows all that stuff. They'll say, we'll give you the extended, which means they're willing to also extend over things that weren't in the public databases. So they feel comfortable enough that they get the survey, they did their stuff, because the good news is, this is good news. There aren't too many fraudulent activities going on out there. When they search the databases, they feel confident to stick their necks out and ensure, that. So I found another good site today. Before we leave today, I'll give two sites. The one I talked about, tax liens, I found that again last night. And in my search for that, I found a really good one that is someone in Cook County, I forget who it was. But he's telling us all that we should search our the databases of the counties where our properties are. Well, how I've been saying, this is a theme that runs through as a private property owner. Keep up, see what's going on. It's your responsibility if somebody's doing something fraudulent against your title search.
So this is like two different insurance. Like if I had PMI.
Yeah, right to think two different things, because it's right to right away think two different. Because that's an insurance, but I like that for your mortgage. That's
okay.
Mortgage insurance, but it's good that you're thinking that's to cover if the borrower defaults on the mortgage. And this is a policy that's insuring what you bought that day. You signed up to pay the bank back $300,000, but you walked away with a sense, Troy, of saying, that title company's gonna stick their neck out for me because I just bought that title insurance. And so they're actually insuring.
So you carrying like two insurances then?
Because who's actually getting insured in a sense under PMI is the lender, right, is the one that's saying, well, here too, because there's a lender's policy. But you also are getting insured here. And
So it'll be two insurances then.
There'll definitely be two, and you're definitely gonna have, if there's a lender involved, you'll need property owner's insurance too, right? The one if somebody slips and falls or it burns to the ground, so that's another insurance. And don't forget, you probably will get that question of the co-owner's insurance clause. You know, if I buy the 80% of replacement value, then I'll get my 100%. And if you bought something less, you'll just set up your proration and put the 0.8 at the bottom, whatever they told you at the top, and then you just multiply that times what they say the whole claim was, and then you'll figure out how it's gonna be prorated. So that's this chapter, guys. I just wanted to make sure you understood, we've got extended coverage, which means, you know, it's better than standard coverage. I want you to know, we'll circle back here in a little bit to chapter 10, but there's a lot of redundancies between very short chapters. So I want to get us into contracts right now. We'll come back to this after we finish contracts. But let's flip all together to chapter 12. Page 235. Now, I know one of the reasons some people really, they even bend their schedules today. Thank you, I appreciate, making the effort. I mean, I say I appreciate it, I really say I appreciate it, because I just want to hear the good news eventually, that you pass. And so I want to make sure that I do the best job I can, because what did we say, 28 questions come from the agency chapter and the contracts chapter of the 100 national ones. So it's not quite a third, right? But it's close to a third. And so, these two chapters, 12 and 11, really go hand in hand also, because like I said, you're an agent out there trying to get two people to enter into a contract. One of the two people might be yourself, but it's still, you're trying to get two people to enter into a real estate contract. Like we just learned, you have to be called that. That's in this chapter. I'll point it out when we get to it. Actually, it's page 243. But I'll point it out again in a minute. Where it tells us it has to be called a real estate contract. It can't be called something else. Now, I will just, maybe one person in here, who will say this before, I can't remember. I will just say, before I start this chapter, because I can't. I honestly, sometimes I say, I won't even mention Professor Leacock this time around. But I just can't, because I feel this, deference and reverence to him, because he held that stature. I think if he were walking down, this is a law school professor, right, who taught contracts, first year contracts. So when you're in law school, you go through that section that you're with. We had 3 sections, about 100 people each, the whole year, and you all take the same exact classics, right? It's like what everybody should know, right? First year, and then second, third year, you get to take what you want, basically. So you're with those people the whole year. And contracts and one other class, I think it was criminal law, they covered both semesters. And maybe property law did too, but there were others that were just one. So we had him for 2 semesters, and he was the roughest, toughest, hardest professor I ever had, and the best. So that's why when I get to this chapter, I am certainly in no way tuning any horn that I may or may not have, but I just know that he is well versed in law advice to our clients. We're always going to say, you have to have an attorney review it. You just say, I can't give legal advice. There's no shame in that, right? Because we're going to learn in this chapter. There are more than just 2 professions, but let's just put us as one of them, real estate agents, and a lot of different financial professions, right? They get accused of and found guilty of, and you'll get a question on this. It's coming up in a couple pages. For the unauthorized practice of law. Accountants get accused of that a lot too, like CPAs. Anyway, we don't want that to happen to us, but we do need to know this stuff because it is important when we are one of the players in the negotiation process for the contract being formed, and we have to know how this works to do our jobs without creating liability for ourselves. So that part, it's for real, why we're learning the law here. But every valid contract, you have 5 elements to a valid contract. And what we mean basically by a valid contract is this. If you anticipate at some point and even if you don't anticipate it, if you ever want to draw someone into court and sue them on the basis of this contract or this document that you signed, it has to have these elements that we're gonna talk about today, or it's not a valid contract. You won't have anything to sue on because you didn't create it. It wasn't like born in that sense, okay? So there are these bullets right here. They present it slightly differently here, but I'm gonna tell you it's a promise in exchange for another promise. And this is out, the exact words of Professor Leacock's mouth. He was, by the way, a very interesting person, was from Barbados. So, they're an English satellite colony, whatever, and so they practice English law there, so he was a whole barrister thing and stuff. He was a very interesting man. So he had like the island accent mixed with, an English accent, those from down. And so, but he was very proper, wore a three-piece suit every single day for the whole year. It's class, But like in his delivery of things, even though this he would use examples of like Penny Lane, and there were always Beatles references. Every single reference he ever made in the hypo was a Beatle reference. But he said this. He goes, "I don't care what anyone else ever tells you. Promise in exchange for another promise." Remember, I've told you many times, free will to contract. That means as long as it's not illegal, then whatever the human mind can create and say, this promise in exchange for this promise, we're going to contract for it. Sky's the limit, right? But these other elements have to be there. So one of the things is, it does have to be for a legal purpose. If it's illegal, I made the joke with you, we can't go in front of the judge and you had a contract out to take, hit out on someone, or your drug delivery didn't come, whatever the case may be. You might have met all the other elements, but those contracts you can't bring in front of the honorable, judge whomever. So, legally competent parties is also a big one. And we're going to learn in Illinois, that means I had to be in a sound mind, right, understand what I was doing, and be over 18. So we'll talk more about it. And then we talked about this with the other class yesterday. I said, don't worry, we're going to get to consideration, because it was one of the valid elements of a deed as well, or an element of a valid deed. But it needs consideration, and then, what's that last one? Voluntarily. So yeah, I had to have been A, of sound mind, and B, the right of age, but I also had to have wanted and intended to enter into that contract. And we'll talk more about it, like I said, that had been voluntary. Like here, I couldn't have been coerced in it or through duress or something, obviously the worst case scenario, if you want something to bring to mind here, is somebody couldn't have had a gun to my head and said, sign, right? I didn't voluntarily enter that. So these are the valid elements. Let's just talk about it one more time. Five elements of a valid contract. There must be a promise in exchange for another promise. Legal purpose, legally competent parties, voluntarily entered into, and then we had to put consideration down on the table. We're going to learn, what that means is something of value. It can be anything. It's not defined by law. Like the courts don't say, consideration has to be this. People usually want money. It's little, like I said, definition. Something of value. People usually want money. That the parties in a contract will put down on the table is a nice little phrase to use, right? So that it induces them to move forward with whatever other terms must be, completed. For example, in our real estate contracts, I said this yesterday, I think, the earnest money that's put down by the buyer it's doing this, that, maybe it was only $3,000, maybe it was $5,000, maybe it was $10,000, whatever the dollar amount was though. It was enough money that ushered, I should say, the seller that buyer was going to move forward with the other duties they have under our real estate contract. And let's say, most deals are financed, so that would mean, for the most part, following through because there are a lot of hoops. CEO will come for the rest of us next week, by the way. She came for the other group, that's leaving their last days today, but she'll come for us next week. But I was going to say, there are a lot of lenders hoops that they make you jump through, so that buyer has to be on board and get, not hold up the deal. Because they got their money on the table, like if you don't meet your date, and it was all on because the buyer didn't get their paperwork in and everything, I'm just saying, the seller could, most sellers aren't, you're that late in the game, if we gotta need another week, whatever, they'll hang on and wait. But I'm just saying, technically, they could have said, hey, we had other, seller or buyers waiting in the backstage there, in the side stage, so we're gonna cut you loose. We don't even trust now that you're gonna do the other stuff you said you were gonna do. And it induced the seller, right, to take the property off the market for the time period that the seller, so that's consideration. But it could be, just in case, I want you to understand, it could be of anything of legal value. If, I wanted to put my Rolex down on the table, or, I wanted to put stocks and bonds or something, anything of legal value, because it's what it matters to the other person that you're, saying, take the property out of the market for me for a few, for a month or 45 days, whatever. Now, let's talk about these, and I go through them always really quickly. You very well could get a question on any of this stuff on page 236, 235, 236. Let's talk about a contract can be express or implied. An express contract just means you used words. So usually you're going to have it reduced to writing, but you can be in an oral contract with someone, and that's an express contract. Because an implied contract is something like this, right? What are some of the examples I use from time to time? Let's just say, I know this might be kind of silly, but let's say I rolled up with my bike. I'm going to use you as an example, all right, okay? I have my bike here. I park it over here. You look at me. And I said, you pull out $100, and you have it here. And I said, I take your $100, I give you the bike, I walk away. We didn't exchange a single word, but all those actions we just did for each other, we just made an implied contract. I just sold him my bike. I mean, it's kind of silly, right? But that's implied through actions. The other class who's done chapter 15 with me, remember when I said we were in the page where it says, a state for years, right? Which is a misnomer. A state for years can be a week, a month, a state for years. And there was periodic tenancy, and then there was from period to period and the periodic tenancy. And I said, you had a lease for a year and it ended. Landlord, first month after your first lease on paper ended. Nobody talked to each other. You just sent your check in like you did all the other months. He took your check, went and put it in the bank, and you can see it's cash. He just rented, we won't get into all of chapter 15, but he just rented you that apartment for another month. And you had no written express, whether no words were exchanged. That's another example, if you want to use that one. But the bike thing, or any good you want to think of that you just, two people never speak, but like through these actions, make a sale, that's also implied. And that's like real contract law. You could be up in front of a judge saying, we had a contract. My actions, a lot of contracts are implied, right? And you can win based on what the actions were. And that's like really deep within contract law. But most contracts, every attorney will say reduce it to writing, right? So most people do reduce, negotiations to writing. I want you to know, like we were saying, this written contract are going to be the ones that are more quote unquote enforceable in court. It says with very few exceptions. That's why I say it how I do. You can create an implied contract. It totally exists in contract law, and people win cases on implied contracts. But it's not too common. Usually people put it into writing. Now, the Illinois statute of frauds says that, as a law in Illinois, it's an act that you can pull a book out and read about it. The Illinois statute of frauds in Illinois says that contracts for the sale of land need to be in writing. And we mean if you want to go enforce them in court, right? So you need to know that because they ask that a lot. So it's the Illinois statute of frauds. And if you need a little something to remember what the statute of frauds is, that's another set of laws that's dated way back to feudal England. And this is where it comes from. The judges, when the court systems were first forming, real old rudimentary court systems and stuff, judges got tired of people getting up there and just blah, 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 la, 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 la. Nobody had written anything down, this, I gotta listen to some more lies. So they created a body of law called the Statute of Frauds, which basically the whole body of law says, reduce your stuff to writing. That's what, there's no real link to it, but know that the statute of frauds, every state has them. Statute of frauds laws come from, we don't want just oral testimony to prove stuff in court. We want people to write their negotiations and their contracts down in writing. So that's why it's the Illinois statute of frauds says that a contract for the sale of land must be in writing and be enforceable in court. And they just throw this in here, I think it's nice. Don't forget that the employment agreements between us and our sponsoring broker is one of the ones that, don't forget, those need to be in writing. You'll get that question on the exam. Bilateral and unilateral contracts. This is real easy to understand. Every time you have a promise in exchange for another promise, that's the bilateral. I got one promise on this side in exchange for the other promise over here. So the bilateral promises. A unilateral promise, we have two, the best example to use is one of our own contracts. Not everybody's done chapter 13 with me, but half of you have, and we went over the different listing agreements. And it was at that point when I said, hey, all these listing agreements are actually unilateral contracts, because there's only one promise in there. The promise is from the seller to pay the agent a certain amount of percentage commission if we are able to sell the property. There's not a remember the only one that was, for those of you who haven't taken that chapter yet, one of the listing agreements is called a guaranteed sales plan. And it means that we're going to list your property, but at the end of it, it says, well, if nobody else buys it, which all the other listing agreements say that says I, the agent, will buy it. So there is a promise in exchange for a promise. Because if nobody else buys it, then you're going to pay me what, the commission was on the agreement, and I'm going to buy it. So, like I said, that's a real specific little listing agreement called a guaranteed sales plan, because all the other ones just say, if I'm able to sell your property, then you're going to pay me 5%, 6%, 7%, whatever. So there is one promise on the table, so that's unilateral. But most contracts end up being a promise in exchange for a promise, right? You gotta kind of work and sit and think of examples of unilateral contracts, because most of them are this. This is funny. I laugh. I smile at this, and you guys probably know why. How many times I've said the root word or the English language. So let's look at the use of the word execute. You will get tested on this probably at least one question of your contract. So we're not talking in this little thing here about execute when we mean sign. We're talking about something else here, okay? So we're not talking about this. Because you might use that word when you say, hey, have you executed the contract yet? You might use that. But we're talking about, if you use this phrase, and executed, I'm going to do this today because this means contract, right? Executed contract. This means that everyone who's involved in the promise and exchange for the promise in the contract has discharged all their duties and obligations, and they've executed all their duties and obligations. So an executed contract is one where everybody's done what they're supposed to do. In our example, or our world, the day we all walk out from that real estate closing that day, and it came to fruition, that was a fully executed contract. Because what? The deed was delivered, I should use the right language, in exchange for the purchase price. That is the gist of that 7.0 residential real estate contract. We're going to get to a day where you're going to deliver the deed to me, I'm going to give you the money. And so that's executed contract. Now, I'm going to teach you this real quick. So say that we get them to execute, right, to sign the contract on this day. We'll just call it, 10/1. And then let's say we close on 11/1 is our closing date. This time period between where we sign, it's the first time I've ever made that actually look like that. I'm not trying to, okay, good looking here. So this is called the executory period. So if I use it as executory, it means just the opposite of executed. It means that we got stuff to do. It means that the parties during the executory period of a contract have their duties and obligations to still do. So the period in between, contract getting started and then it actually getting fulfilled, that's called the executory period. And then if we get to the date or whatever, because I like to think in our world, there's so many different contracts, but let's stay within a real estate contract. When we get to closing day, everybody walks out. We just fully executed that contract. So So, they'll test you on the forecast. It might even be part of another question. Do you know what I mean, the understanding what those words mean? They'll have to answer, the question. Now, this next section we're gonna go over, if you ask my opinion, is the most important part of this chapter for real life. For what we're actually gonna do out on the field. You're gonna get tested over it, but it's the most important part after, getting your CMAs together, right? And, making sure you're helping the client out with, good selling prices and good, offers to go in at. Now you're gonna actually start doing the negotiations, and this, to me, like I said, is the most important part to understand in what you're gonna do as an agent. And where I wrote promise and exchange for a promise up here, and I guess they say an agreement or a promise. Okay, but sometimes you'll see people who are teaching contracts talk about the promise and exchange for a promise and call it offer and acceptance. But this is how I see it, and this is how it feels to me. We're trying to get to the promised land, okay? We're trying to get to the promise. I never came in before. I do come. I'm gonna call it the promise. Okay, we're trying to get to the promise in exchange for a promise. But there's a road. There's a road. Let's pretend this is our destination, right? There's a road to get here, and I call it offer and acceptance way. Like street. You have to go through this path to get the promise in exchange for a promise, because you might not just hit it on the head. The terms have to be agreed upon, and maybe that might happen first time around, but let's just say usually there's some negotiations going on in any type of contract situation. So I want you to, especially when you start getting these questions on the test, to just say, I already knew it before, but I'm just remembering from Michelle. You're going to get questions that talk about the offeror and the offeree. Offeror, the giver of the offer, right? The offeree, I didn't spell that right. The receiver of the offer. If you're a receiver of an offer, you've got the power to accept. Right? If you're the receiver of an offer, because you're not called, that's what you're called, the offeree. So it's still in the language of the offer, but you've got the power to accept. So this is the giver of the offer, and the receiver of offer. So like I said, this guy, this gal, has the power to accept. So this is how it happens. If you are the first one, right, to pitch out, let's say within a contract for the purchase of real estate, to throw out a price, you are the offeror. But let's just say you're the buyer, you come in and you say, okay, we'll make up a listing price, $300,000. I'm gonna offer $295, or let's say I'm gonna offer $295, but I want $3,000 in closing cost credit. That's common. You usually could get something like that for your clients, especially first-time home buyers, especially. Closing cost credit, and you want that schnazzy washer and dryer. I usually end up saying, if I have it right now, those have become a point of contention sometimes in deals, because now we're in like a whole new space cadet world of washer and dryers that we didn't used to be in. So properties that have those and people that haven't been exposed to those yet, I found that they see those as very valuable to the deal. And I want I don't know, let's think of one other thing. And I want the
Samsung refrigerator.
Well, the refrigerators usually come, but I was going to I had this happen recently, Rick. Somebody wanted somebody's personal entertainment center that they had just purchased like a week ago, so it was this really snazzy one. So I'm offeror, right? The agent, I communicate that to my agent with their mouthpiece, right? It gets communicated over to the other agent, or you just think the buyer, however you want to see him in your mind. The offeree, he goes back to his agent, seller now, says, all right, I'll accept the $295. I'm not going to give $3,000 in closing costs. I'll give him the washer and the dryer, but I'm not leaving my personal property. what just happened, and I don't want you to lose sight of what just happened. That offeror who made that offer for $295, the washer and dryer, the $3,000 closing costs, and the personal property, I use this analogy because I want to make it effective. It went bang, bang, I shot you dead, it dies, it has no breath, no life in it whatsoever. The reason it's important to understand that, I, seller, didn't accept those terms, I didn't use the power to accept. What I did was, I became, real quick, I was an offeree for a second, I put on the offeror hat, and I sent over a new offer, brand new born offer. Doesn't matter that it's slightly, it's pretty much the same, and it's a brand new offer. Because in contract law, you're gonna use it out there in the real world. People use the term counter offer, but it is not a real term in contract law. People counter via a verb, right? But in contract law, you've got offers on the table. It died, you got a new offer. It died, you got a new offer. Because you're always keeping track of who's offeror and who's offeree. And this is why. You need to know this for the exam. An offer can be revoked by the offeror until it is accepted. Even if I looked you in the eye, Betty, and said, I'll keep it open for your client until Friday. Or my client said he'll keep it open until Friday. Even if I told you I'd keep it open. If somebody else comes along and you didn't call me and say, give me your acceptance, that seller, under contract law, will not be liable in any way for accepting another offer that comes in before the one on the table gets accepted. Would it be good business practice for that agent or that, whoever's court the ball was in, to call the other side and say, hey, we haven't heard from you, you haven't accepted, we're about to accept another offer right now. You know what I mean? And just give them one last, that would be good business practice. I would do that, right? You know what I mean? But they're not legally bound to do it. You won't get tested on this next thing I said.